poor girl is scoffed at by engineers. Until she gets a plane no one else could to work. Ashley Johnson was being kicked out of the aviation company's hangar for the 5th time that month. Her 19 years carried the weight of necessity and the determination of someone who had no choice but to fight for every opportunity. "Get out of here, girl. This isn't a place for a nosy janitor," shouted the lead engineer, Richard Thompson, pointing toward the hangar door. Ashley gripped the bucket and mop tightly, but her eyes remained fixed on the experimental plane dominating the center of the hangar. That mid-sized aircraft, painted white with blue accents, had been sitting there for nearly 3 years. None of the engineers on the team could get it to work properly. "Miss, did you hear what Dr. Richard said?" said Matthew Peterson, one of the younger engineers on the team, his tone softer, but just as firm. "Sorry, Dr. Matthew, it's just, I wanted to understand why you can't get it to fly," Ashley replied, lowering her head but not moving. Richard laughed loudly, his laughter echoing through the hangar. "Understand? A janitor who didn't even finish high school is going to understand what 15 trained engineers can't solve." He turned to his colleagues. "Are you all hearing this?" The other engineers laughed along, some shaking their heads in disdain. Ashley felt heat rise to her face, but she took a deep breath. Her mother, Margaret, had been in County General Hospital for 2 weeks with heart problems. The treatment she really needed cost over $200,000. The company had offered a $300,000 prize to anyone who could get the experimental plane to work perfectly. It was an abandoned military project the company had bought from the government for a fraction of the price, hoping to adapt it for civilian use. "I can help," Ashley murmured, almost whispering. "What?" Richard stepped closer, disbelief written on his face. "I said I can help. My father was an aviation mechanic. He worked on this same model when he was in military service. The silence in the hangar was broken only by the distant sound of commercial planes taking off from the main runway. Richard crossed his arms and studied Ashley for a moment. "Your father, huh? And where is he now?" "He passed away when I was 15. Work accident at another company." Richard sighed and shook his head. "Look, kid, I feel for your situation, but this is serious business. No room for games. This plane is worth over $5 million, and if someone messes it up—" "Richard, leave the girl alone," interrupted a woman's voice. Everyone turned to see Mrs. Jenkins, the 68-year-old cleaning supervisor, approaching in her spotless blue uniform, a motherly smile on her face. "Mrs. J, you shouldn't interfere," Richard said, trying to keep his tone respectful. "I've worked at this company for 40 years, son. I've seen plenty of smart people mess up and plenty of simple folks work miracles. Ashley is a good girl, and if she says she knows planes, maybe it's worth listening." Matthew stepped closer to Ashley, studying her with curiosity. "What was your father's name?" "David Johnson. He worked at Fairfield Air Force Base before coming here." Matthew exchanged a glance with Richard. That name was known in military aviation circles. "David Johnson, the same one who worked on the Air Force's training plane project." Ashley nodded, feeling a pang of pride and longing at the same time. "That's him. He always said every plane has its own personality, its own way of speaking. When I was little, he'd take me to see the planes, taught me to listen to the engine, to feel the vibrations." Richard scoffed. "Listen to the engine? What kind of nonsense is that? Every engine has a specific sound when it's running well. When there's a problem, the sound changes. Daddy taught me how to tell the difference." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to hit the like button and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out since we're just starting. Now back to the story. Mrs. Jenkins smiled and gave Ashley a gentle pat on the shoulder. "See? The girl knows what she's talking about." Richard glanced at his wristwatch. It was Wednesday noon. The meeting with the investors was scheduled for Friday. If they couldn't show any progress, the project would be scrapped and the plane sold for parts. "All right," Richard said with a sigh. "You've got 2 hours during lunch, but don't touch anything. Just look and tell me what you think might be wrong." Ashley smiled, the first genuine smile she'd had in weeks. "Thank you, Dr. Richard. I promise I won't get in the way. And Matthew, you keep an eye on her. If anything seems off, you call me." Matthew nodded in agreement, but there was something in his eyes that hinted at real curiosity about what Ashley might uncover. When everyone left for lunch, the hangar was nearly empty. Only Ashley, Matthew, and a drowsy security guard remained. Ashley approached the plane slowly, like someone approaching a wounded animal. The aircraft was about 50 feet long, with low wings and a turboprop engine. The paint was slightly faded, and some panels had been removed where engineers had attempted different repairs. "What have you already tried?" Ashley asked, walking around the plane. Matthew followed her, explaining, "We've replaced practically everything. The engine, electrical system, hydraulics, navigation instruments. The plane starts, the engine runs, but every time we try to take off, something goes wrong. Sometimes the engine fails, sometimes it's the hydraulic system." Ashley stopped in front of the engine and closed her eyes for a moment. "Can I ask you to start the engine?" "Richard told you not to touch anything." "I won't touch. I just want to listen." Matthew hesitated, but there was something in Ashley's determination that convinced him. He went to the cockpit and started the engine. The sound filled the hangar, a deep, steady rumble. Ashley stepped closer, placing her hand on the plane's hull. She closed her eyes and stayed like that for nearly 5 minutes while the engine ran. "You can turn it off now," she finally said. Matthew shut off the engine and stepped out of the cockpit. "So?" "The engine is fine. The problem isn't mechanical." "What do you mean?" "The sound is clean, the vibration is steady, but something interferes with it when you try to take off." Matthew looked at her skeptically. "Interference? What kind of interference?" "I don't know yet. I need to check the other systems." Ashley walked to the rear of the plane, where an open panel revealed a tangle of wires and electronic components. "These wires here, are they original?" "No, we had to replace all the electrical wiring. The original was too old." "Ah," Ashley said, and something in her voice made Matthew pay attention. "Ah, what?" "My dad always said every plane model has its quirks. The wires can't be just any kind. They have to match the exact specifications. But these wires are better than the original ones, more modern, more durable." "That doesn't matter. If they're not identical to the original, they could be causing electrical interference between the systems." Matthew considered this for a moment. It was a possibility no one had thought of. They'd been so focused on upgrading components that they might have overlooked compatibility. "Are you sure about this?" "I am. Daddy showed me a similar case once. A plane that worked perfectly on the ground but had issues in the air. It was because the new wires created slight electrical interference that only showed up when the plane was in motion." At that moment, Richard returned from lunch with 3 other engineers. He saw Ashley standing by the open panel, and his face turned red. "Didn't I tell you not to touch anything?" "She didn't touch it," Matthew quickly defended. "She was just looking." "And what did she discover by looking?" Richard asked sarcastically. "She thinks the problem might be the new electrical wiring. Interference between systems." Richard laughed. "Interference? We tested all the wiring. It's perfect." "But you tested it on the ground," Ashley said. "The problem only shows up when the plane is flying." "And how do you know that?" "Because my dad taught me that some issues only appear when all systems are running together under pressure." One of the other engineers, Brian Miller, stepped forward. "Hold on. That actually makes sense. When the plane is in the air, the electrical demand is higher. If there's incompatibility between old and new wiring—" "Brian, you're not seriously listening to this girl," Richard cut in. "Why not? We've tried everything else. What harm could it do to test this theory?" Richard checked his watch again. Thursday was fast approaching and they still had nothing concrete to show the investors. "Fine," he said, clearly annoyed. "But if this is a waste of time, I swear—" "It won't be," Ashley interrupted with a confidence that surprised everyone, including herself. The rest of the afternoon was spent examining all the plane's wiring. Ashley followed every step, pointing out small details the engineers had overlooked. Her memory of her father's lessons was impressively precise. By nightfall, they had identified at least 12 spots where the new wiring might be interfering with the original systems. "This is going to be a lot of work to replace," Matthew said, reviewing their notes. "What if we don't replace all of it?" Ashley suggested. "What if we just isolate the interference points?" "How?" Dad once fixed a similar problem using small insulators on specific spots. He didn't have to replace the whole wiring. Richard, who had stayed quiet for most of the discussion, finally spoke. Where do we get these insulators? There's an electronics store in town, but they're expensive. How expensive? About $5,000 maybe. Richard considered it. $5,000 was a lot to bet on a janitor's theory, but it was nothing compared to the $300,000 prize. Fine. Tomorrow morning, you come with me to the store. But if this doesn't work, you stay out of this hangar for good. Understood? Ashley nodded, her heart racing. This was her only chance. That night, she visited her mother at County General Hospital. Margaret was awake but very weak. How was work today, honey? It was good, Mum. Maybe I have a chance to earn some extra money. Don't get into trouble, Ashley. It's not worth it. It's not trouble, Mum. It's honest work. I'm helping some engineers with a plane. Margaret smiled weakly. Your father would be proud. He always said you had a knack for this stuff. I know, Mom. I remember. Ashley held her mother's hand, feeling how cold and fragile it was. The treatment that could save her was just days away, but it felt as impossible as making a plane fly. The next morning, Ashley arrived at work before 6. She had stayed up all night, mentally reviewing everything her father had taught her about aviation. Richard showed up at 7, looking like he hadn't slept much either. Let's get this over with, he said, grabbing the company car keys. The electronics store was downtown, about an hour's drive from the airport. They spoke little during the trip, but Ashley noticed Richard was nervous. Dr. Richard, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why is this project so important for the company? Richard sighed. Because if it works, we secure a 3-year contract with the Air Force. That means stability for all employees. And if it doesn't work, the company will have to let go of half the staff, including you. Ashley felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. It wasn't just about the bonus or her mother's treatment. It was about the future of many families. At the store, they bought the special insulators Ashley had described. The salesman, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, seemed puzzled by the technical specifications. These insulators are used in old military equipment, he said. Haven't seen anyone buy these in years. It's for a special project, Richard explained. Well, you're in luck. These are the last ones I have in stock. They don't make them anymore. On the way back, Richard seemed more thoughtful. Ashley, how do you know so much about aviation? My dad taught me, but also I've always loved it. When I was little, I dreamed of being an aeronautical engineer. And why didn't you? Because when my dad passed, I had to work to help at home. I didn't even finish high school. Richard drove in silence for a few minutes. Have you ever thought about going back to school? Every day, but I don't have the time or the money. If your theory works, maybe things will change. Back at the hangar, the team of engineers had already gathered. The news that Richard had gone out to buy equipment based on Ashley's suggestion had spread, and there was a mix of skepticism and curiosity in the air. Let's see if our expert's theory works, Richard said in a tone that could have been sarcastic or hopeful. Ashley worked alongside Matthew to install the insulators in the specific spots she had identified. It was delicate work, requiring precision and patience. Are you sure you know what you're doing? Matthew asked as they worked. I am, Ashley replied, but her voice trembled slightly. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. As they worked, other airport employees began showing up to see what was happening. Mrs. Jenkins brought coffee for everyone and made sure to stay close to Ashley. Don't mind them, sweetheart, she whispered. You're doing the right thing. By 2 in the afternoon, they had finished installing all the insulators. The plane looked exactly the same on the outside, but Ashley knew something fundamental had changed. Now let's test it, Richard said. They started the engine again. The sound was the same as always, but Ashley paid attention to details only she could notice. There was a subtle difference in the vibration, a harmony that hadn't been there before. Sounds the same, Brian said. No, Ashley replied. It's better. Listen carefully. They fell silent, focusing on the engine's sound. After a few minutes, Matthew shook his head. I don't hear a difference. The difference will show when all systems are running together, Ashley explained. We need a flight test. Richard looked at her as if she'd suggested blowing up the hangar. Flight test? Are you crazy? If something goes wrong, it won't, Ashley said with a conviction she didn't know she had. And if it does, who takes responsibility? I will. The simplicity of her answer took everyone by surprise. A 19-year-old janitor was volunteering to take responsibility for a test that could result in the loss of a $5 million plane. Ashley, Matthew said gently, you can't take on that responsibility. You can't afford it if it goes wrong. I know, but I also know it's going to work. Richard walked to the hangar window and stared at the runway. Commercial planes took off and landed regularly, an aerial dance that happened dozens of times a day. Who's going to fly it? He finally asked. I can, said a voice behind them. Everyone turned to see James Wilson, a retired Air Force pilot who worked as a flight instructor at the airport. He was about 55, with graying hair and over 30 years of experience flying military planes. James, you can't take that kind of risk, Richard said. Richard, I've flown planes much worse than this, and if the girl is right, you'll solve a problem that's been holding the company back for years. And if she's wrong? Then at least we tried. But I trust what she's saying. Her father was a good man, an excellent mechanic. If she learned from him, it's worth a shot. Ashley looked at James with gratitude. It was comforting to know someone believed in her without hesitation. Richard ran a hand through his hair, clearly conflicted. All right, he said finally. But it's a short flight. Just one lap around the runway. If there's any trouble, James comes back immediately. Deal, James replied. They spent the next hour preparing the plane for the test. Ashley watched every check, every adjustment, feeling a mix of nerves and anticipation. When everything was ready, James climbed into the cockpit and powered up the systems. The engine hummed smoothly, and all indicators showed normal operation. All green here, James said over the radio. Cleared for takeoff, Richard responded from the makeshift control tower they'd set up in the hangar. Ashley watched from the hangar window as the plane slowly taxied to the runway. Her heart pounded so loudly she could hear it. The plane picked up speed, 50 miles per hour, 70, 100. Then, smoothly, the wheels left the ground. It's flying, Matthew murmured, disbelief in his voice. It's working perfectly, James radioed. All systems normal. No interference. Ashley felt tears of relief roll down her face. It had worked. Her theory was right. The plane made a full loop around the airport and landed smoothly. When James stepped out of the cockpit, he was grinning from ear to ear. Perfect, he said. It flies like it's brand new. Richard approached Ashley, and for a moment she thought he might criticize her. Instead, he held out his hand. Congratulations, he said. You solved a problem we couldn't crack in 3 years. Ashley shook his hand, still not fully believing what had happened. Now, Richard continued, we need to talk about the reward. The reward, $300,000, enough to pay for her mother's treatment and still have money left for her to go back to school. But before that, Richard said, I'd like to make an offer. How about working with us as a technical consultant? You clearly understand aviation in a way we don't. Ashley looked around the hangar, at the engineers now watching her with respect, at Mrs. Jenkins smiling proudly, at the plane now running flawlessly. I accept, she said. But first, I need to finish high school. The company can cover your education, Richard said. Consider it part of the package. That afternoon, as final tests were run on the plane, Ashley went to visit her mother at County General Hospital. Margaret was asleep, but woke when she felt her daughter's presence. How was today, sweetheart? Mom, Ashley said, holding her hand, I did it. I got the money for your treatment. Margaret opened her eyes completely confused. What do you mean? Ashley told the whole story, from the first time she was kicked out of the hangar to the plane's successful flight. Margaret listened in silence, tears in her eyes. "Your father would be so proud," she said when Ashley finished. "I know, Mom. I feel him with me when I'm working with planes. And what will you do now?" "I'll work as a consultant for the company, and I'm going back to school. Maybe one day I'll become a real engineer." Margaret smiled. "Honey, you already are an engineer. You might not have the degree, but you have the knowledge and the passion. That's what matters." 2 weeks later, Margaret's treatment had begun, and the doctors were optimistic about the results. Ashley was attending night classes to finish high school and working at the hangar as a technical consultant during the day. Richard had completely changed his attitude toward her. He discovered Ashley had an intuition for technical problems that perfectly complemented the team's theoretical knowledge. "You have a special talent," he said one afternoon as they worked on another troubled plane. "I think it's because I learned to listen," Ashley replied. "Dad always said planes talk to us, we just need to know how to listen." Matthew, who had become one of Ashley's biggest advocates at the company, approached with a folder in hand. "Ashley, I have news for you." "What news?" "The Air Force heard about the work you did with the experimental plane. They want you to analyze some other old planes having similar issues." Ashley looked at the folder Matthew held. It was an opportunity she could never have imagined just weeks ago. "Will they pay well?" she asked. "Very well. 50,000 per plane, fixed." Ashley quickly calculated. If she could solve the problems for 3 or 4 planes, she'd have enough money to support herself through years of study. "I'll take it." That night she went to the cemetery to visit her father's grave. It was a tradition she had created. Whenever something important happened in her life, she went to talk to him. "Dad," she said, kneeling in front of the simple headstone, "I did it. I used everything you taught me to help people and earn honest money. Mom's going to be okay, and I'm going to study engineering." The wind blew softly through the cemetery trees, and Ashley smiled. She knew her father was proud. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. 6 months later, Ashley was in her final year of high school and had fixed problems on 8 different planes for the Air Force. Her reputation as an expert in vintage aviation was growing, and she began receiving invitations to work on projects in other states. Margaret had fully recovered and returned to work as a seamstress. She was proud of her daughter, but also worried about the pace Ashley was keeping. "Honey, you need to rest a little," she said one Sunday morning as they had coffee together. "I'm fine, Mum, and there's so much I want to learn." "I know, but you also need to live. When was the last time you went out with friends?" Ashley considered the question. The truth was, she had few friends her own age. She spent so much time with older engineers and pilots that she sometimes forgot she was still a 20-year-old. "Maybe you're right," she admitted. That weekend, Ashley decided to do something different. Instead of going to the hangar or studying, she went to a city park where she used to go with her father as a child. She was sitting on a bench, watching families enjoying their Sunday, when someone sat down beside her. "Hi, Ashley." She turned and saw Matthew, but he was dressed casually, without his company uniform. "Matthew, what are you doing here?" "Same as you, I imagine, trying to remember there's life outside the hangar." They laughed, and Ashley realized it was the first time in months she had genuinely laughed. "Can I ask you something?" Matthew said. "Sure. Do you ever regret leaving a normal life to dedicate yourself to aviation?" Ashley thought about the question for a moment. "You know, I don't think I ever had a normal life. After my dad died and my mom got sick, my life was always about survival. Now for the first time I feel like I'm really living. But don't you miss, I don't know, hanging out with people your age, dating, doing things 20-year-olds do?" "Sometimes, but I also think everyone has their own path. Mine seems to be with airplanes." Matthew nodded. "Have you ever thought about getting a degree in aeronautical engineering?" "Every day, but I'm still finishing high school." "And after?" "I don't know. It's expensive. And even with the money I'm making, I have to think about my mom's future too." "Did you know there are government scholarships for people like you?" "What do you mean?" "Scholarships for those already working in the field who want to specialize. You could apply and study while still working." Ashley felt a surge of hope. The idea of becoming a real engineer with a degree and everything still seemed like a distant dream, but maybe it wasn't impossible. Could you help me with that? Of course, in fact, I've already looked into some options for you. Matthew pulled some papers from his pocket. These are 3 universities with special programs for people already in the field. You could study at night and keep working during the day. Ashley examined the papers, her heart racing. There was information on how to apply, what documents she needed, application deadlines. Matthew, why are you doing this for me? He hesitated for a moment. Because you have a special talent, and because, well, I admire your determination. You didn't give up even when everyone doubted you. Ashley looked at Matthew closely for the first time. He was a few years older than her, maybe around 25, with brown hair and kind eyes. He had always been respectful and encouraging, but she had never thought of him as more than a co-worker. Matthew, can I ask you something personal? Sure. Do you have a girlfriend? He laughed, seeming a little nervous. No? Why? Just curious. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the children playing in the park. Ashley, Matthew finally said, would you like to have dinner with me tomorrow? I mean, not work-related, just dinner. Ashley smiled. I'd really like that. On Monday, when Ashley arrived at work, there was an unusual buzz in the hangar. Richard was talking animatedly with a man in a suit she didn't recognize. Ashley, Richard called when he saw her. Come here, I want to introduce someone. She approached, curious. This is Colonel Robert Anderson from the Air Force. Colonel, this is Ashley Johnson, our special consultant. The colonel extended his hand, and Ashley noticed he greeted her with the same respect he showed the engineers. Miss Johnson, I've heard a lot about your work. We're impressed by your ability to solve problems others can't. Thank you, Colonel. Actually, I came here with a proposal. The Air Force is considering creating a special program for people with unique technical skills, even without traditional training. We'd like you to consider joining us. Ashley looked at Richard, who seemed both proud and worried. What exactly would this mean? You'd work part-time for us, solving technical issues on military aircraft. In return, we'd pay for your college education, and you'd receive specialized training. It was an incredible opportunity, but Ashley hesitated. Can I think about it? Of course, but don't take too long. The program starts in 3 months. After the colonel left, Richard approached Ashley. It's a great opportunity, he said. I know, but I also like working here. You don't have to choose. You can work part-time for us and part-time for them. You wouldn't mind? Ashley, you've revolutionized our work here. Of course, I'd prefer to have you full-time, but I understand you need to grow. That evening, during dinner with Matthew, Ashley told him about the Air Force's offer. It's amazing, he said. Are you going to accept? I think so. But I'm nervous. What if I can't keep up with their standards? Are you kidding? You've solved problems that trained engineers couldn't figure out. You'll do just fine. What about us? Ashley asked. If I accept, I'll have even less free time. Matthew smiled. We'll make it work. I'm not giving up on you that easily. 2 weeks later, Ashley signed the contract with the Air Force. It was the start of a new chapter in her life, one she never could have imagined when she was being kicked out of the hangar months earlier. On her first day at the Air Force Base, she met other technicians and engineers who worked with military aircraft. To her surprise, many of them had heard of her. You're the girl who got the experimental plane to fly? Asked a veteran sergeant. That's me, Ashley replied, still getting used to being recognized for her work. My commander wouldn't stop talking about it. Said you have a special touch with old planes. During her first few weeks, Ashley worked on 3 different planes, all with problems that seemed impossible to solve. In each case, she managed to pinpoint the issue using a combination of technical knowledge and the intuition she'd developed. One of the most interesting cases involved a transport plane with intermittent hydraulic system failures. The base engineers had tested everything, replaced components and reviewed all the documentation, but the problem persisted. Ashley spent 2 days just observing and listening to the plane. On the 3rd day, she made a surprising discovery. The problem isn't in the hydraulic system, she told Colonel Anderson. What do you mean? The issue is in the ventilation system. There's a slight vibration that affects the hydraulics only under certain atmospheric conditions. Is that possible? Yes, my dad showed me a similar case once. The vibration is so subtle it only shows up under specific conditions. They tested Ashley's theory and found she was right. The problem was fixed with a simple adjustment to the ventilation system. How did you figure that out? The colonel asked. Because I pay attention to details others overlook. I've learned that every plane is unique, even if they're the same model. As the months passed, Ashley's reputation grew even more. She started receiving invitations to aviation conferences, and several universities reached out offering scholarships. But perhaps the most important change in her life was personal. Her relationship with Matthew was developing slowly, but steadily. They shared not just a love for aviation, but also a mutual understanding of the importance of work and family. One afternoon, while working together on a project, Matthew asked Ashley a question she wasn't expecting. Have you ever thought about starting your own consulting firm? My own company? No, I've never considered it. Why not? You have experience, a reputation, connections. You could be independent. But I enjoy working as part of a team. I like learning from others. You could have your own company and still work as a team. You could hire other technicians, engineers. You could be the boss instead of always being the employee. The idea was tempting but also intimidating. Ashley was only 21, and the thought of being responsible for a company seemed overly ambitious. I wouldn't even know where to start, she said. I could help. Actually, I was thinking, what if we did this together? Ashley stopped working and looked at Matthew. Together? An aviation consulting firm. You with your hands-on experience, me with my engineering background. We could complement each other. But that would mean leaving our current jobs. Not necessarily. We could start small, taking on specific projects on weekends. If it works out, then we leave our jobs. Ashley considered the proposal. The idea of having control over her professional future was appealing, but she was also afraid of risking the stability she'd worked so hard for. Can I think about it? Of course, no rush. That night, Ashley talked to her mother about Matthew's proposal. What do you think, Mom? I think you should do what makes your heart happy, Margaret replied. You've already proven you can succeed doing what you love. But what if it fails? What if we lose money? Honey, you started as a cleaner and now you work with engineers and colonels. If anyone can make a business work, it's you. Are you sure? I am, and your father would be proud to know you're chasing your dreams. The following week, Ashley told Matthew she wanted to give it a try. They spent the next few months carefully planning how to set up the company, studying the market, making connections, and defining strategies. Their first independent project came 6 months later, an agricultural aviation company struggling with an aging fleet. It was exactly the kind of challenge Ashley loved. They spent 2 weeks on the farm working directly with the local pilots and mechanics. Ashley identified that the issues were related to the type of fuel being used in combination with unauthorized engine modifications. The new fuel is more efficient, she explained to the owner, but it's not compatible with the modifications made to the engines. That's why you're experiencing failures. So what's the solution? 2 options. Go back to the old fuel or make proper engine modifications to support the new fuel. Which is cheaper? In the long run, modifying the engines. But it requires a bigger upfront investment. The client chose the modifications, and within 3 months all the planes were running perfectly with the new fuel. The agricultural aviation company saved about 40% on fuel costs, and Ashley and Matthew received a payment that covered their expenses for 6 months. I think we have a real business now, Matthew said as they celebrated their first project's success. I think so, Ashley agreed, smiling. Over the next year, their company grew steadily. They hired 2 specialist technicians and a secretary, moving into a small but professional office near the airport. Ashley continued studying at night and was close to finishing her first year in aeronautical engineering school. Balancing work, studies, and personal life was tough, but she'd never felt more fulfilled. Her relationship with Matthew was also evolving. They worked well together, both professionally and personally, and Ashley began to imagine a shared future. One afternoon, while working at home reviewing proposals for new projects, Matthew asked a question that changed everything. Ashley, would you marry me? She stopped writing and looked at him. "Are you proposing to me?" "I am. I know it might seem soon, but I love you. I love working with you. I love being with you. I love dreaming with you." Ashley felt tears in her eyes. "Matthew, you don't have to answer now. I just wanted you to know how I feel." "Matthew," she said, holding his hands, "the answer is yes." They married 6 months later in a simple ceremony in Margaret's garden. Mrs. Jenkins was the matron of honor. Richard was one of the groomsmen, and Colonel Anderson made sure to attend. During the celebration, as Ashley danced with her husband, she looked around and saw all the people who had supported her journey, from Mrs. Jenkins, who had always believed in her, to Richard, who had learned to respect her, to Colonel Anderson, who had opened doors for her in the Air Force. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked. "I'm thinking about how fast life can change," she replied. 2 years ago, I was just a cleaner trying to earn money for my mother's treatment. Now I have a company, I'm studying engineering, and I married my best friend. Do you think your father would be proud?" "I'm sure he would. He always said dreams are like planes. They only fly if you have the courage to take off." 3 years later, Ashley graduated as the top student in her aeronautical engineering class. The company she and Matthew had built had become one of the leading aviation consultancies in the state, specializing in solving complex problems with older and modified aircraft. Margaret was fully recovered and worked part-time helping with the company's administrative tasks. She said she had never felt more useful in her life. At the graduation ceremony, Ashley was chosen to give the class speech. As she prepared to take the stage, she reflected on the long journey she had taken. "Dear graduates," she began, "when I started this journey, many people doubted that a former cleaner could become an engineer. Today, I want to tell you that it doesn't matter where you come from. It matters where you're going. Engineering isn't just about formulas and calculations. It's about solving problems, about not giving up when things get tough, about listening when others don't. It's about having the courage to bet on your own ideas, even when everyone says you're wrong. I've learned that every plane has its own personality, its own way of working. The same goes for each of us. We only discover our true potential when we have the courage to fly." After the speech, as she received congratulations from professors and classmates, Ashley saw Richard approaching. "Congratulations, Engineer Johnson," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you, Richard, for everything." "No, thank you. You taught me that skill doesn't come with a diploma, and that sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected places." Later, at the graduation party, Matthew made a toast. "To my wife, who proved that with determination and passion, any dream can come true." Ashley looked around the room, seeing all the people who had been part of her journey. They were faces of different ages, professions and backgrounds, but all united by the same lesson: true talent doesn't need permission to shine. Mrs. Jenkins approached her during the celebration. "Remember when I told you I'd seen plenty of smart people do foolish things and plenty of ordinary people work miracles?" "I remember. You were the miracle, dear. You proved it doesn't matter where we start, only where we have the courage to go." When the party ended and everyone had left, Ashley and Matthew were alone in the empty hall. "Ready for the next adventure?" he asked. "What next adventure?" Matthew smiled and pulled an envelope from his pocket. "A proposal to develop a navigation system for rescue planes. The client is willing to pay very well, but the project is complex." Ashley took the envelope and opened it. It was exactly the kind of challenge she loved. A complex technical problem that required creativity and deep knowledge. "When do we start?" "On Monday." "Perfect." As they drove home, Ashley looked out the car window and saw planes crossing the night sky, their lights blinking like moving stars. "Matthew," she said, "do you think my father knew I'd make it this far?" "I think he planted a seed and knew it would grow. Maybe he didn't know exactly how, but he knew it would. Sometimes I feel like he's still with me when I'm working with planes." "He is. In the knowledge he gave you, the passion he taught you, the courage you inherited from him." Ashley smiled and closed her eyes, listening to the distant sound of planes in the sky. It was a sound that always calmed her, that always made her feel She was exactly where she belonged. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you know someone who's faced struggles like Ashley's, leave a comment sharing your experience. Do you believe that with determination and knowledge, a person can overcome any obstacle? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like this video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other inspiring stories.